Unless you've been living under a rock, I'm sure you've probably heard about the Sydney Sweeney controversy with American Eagle. I wanted to dive into this because I think there's a bigger piece to this picture that really isn't being covered in the media, and people on social media aren't really talking about it. But before we dive into that, in case you haven't seen the ad, this is one of many takes Sydney Sweeney did for American Eagle, wearing their jeans. And it's gotten a lot of controversy because of what she says in it.
Genes are passed down from parents to offspring, often determining traits like hair color, personality, and even eye color. My genes are blue.
Sydney Sweeney has very genes.
Genes are passed.
Okay, I think most people get this. Like, there's a double entendre here between jeans, and the witticism of, blue eyes and blue jeans. It's a funny play on words, and if you get it, you get it. But some people are taking this far too seriously, and they think this is part of a bigger conspiracy to invoke white supremacy and Nazi propaganda. So here's what one person posted on social media. This was her take and her response to the ad.
When a white, blue-eyed woman says, "My chins are blue."
Okay, and before we dive in, if you didn't notice, she has blue eyes. So this is a white woman. She has brown hair, but she also has blue eyes. So, like, as someone commented here, there's nothing more revolting than self-hating white people. Like, she's a white woman with blue eyes and is offended by Sydney Sweeney. It's very bizarre.
That does not just happen in a vacuum. Let's talk about why this ad doesn't just feel off. It feels familiar, like historically familiar. In 1930s Germany, as we all know, white women with blonde hair and blue eyes were held up as this ideal. Not just beautiful, but genetically superior. The Schmatzi regime ran entire campaigns promoting the hereditary fitness of the Aryan women. It's all ridiculous, obviously. There were posters praising blue eyes, propaganda about strong bloodlines. And I won't even get into how they tried to encourage the right women to have babies through cash and medals. Sound familiar? Today we have a global rise in white nationalist movements, especially in the US. There's literally a town being built in Arkansas for white-only residents. And
side note, I'm going to do a video soon about that town. I think it's really interesting. So if you're not subscribed, I would definitely subscribe because I'm going to be covering that shortly.
And online, there's been a resurgence in pseudoscience linking to good genes in relations to health, intelligence, beauty. We can look at the autism and disability space. We can look at the new executive order claiming to end crime and disorder on the streets that has really problematic language about people who might be disruptors. But it's not always really obvious executive orders and RFK grinding his voice into your ears. But that's also how it works. It's like a wink, it's a nudge, it's a dog whistle. So when brands casually, on purpose, joke about good genes, all while the right is literally building white-only towns and reviving eugenicist ideology, this isn't just being tone deaf, it's complicity. Eugenics has never ever disappeared, it's just been rebranded. It's hiding in how we talk about things like autism, beauty, intelligence, reproduction. It shows up in medicine and is even currently inhibiting really, really crucial cancer research. And yes, it shows up in denim ads. Sydney has great genes is not just a pun, because if the internet is going mad that your campaign could plausibly double as a schmatzy propaganda ad in the 1930s, maybe you need to rethink that, or maybe that was the point. Especially when you have a bunch of white nationalists on social media applauding the ad for giving them permission to be white. Just because it doesn't look exactly like 1930s propaganda doesn't mean it's not propaganda. It just means the marketing is modernized.
This is a really weird response for a number of different reasons. Under totalitarian regimes, the state owns everything and kind of dictates how businesses are run, and like you have no private life. So like propaganda under the Nazi regime like came from the state, and her equivocation of that and comparing the two suggests that Trump or someone, there's a propaganda person in the Trump administration who was sitting in on the marketing meetings with American Eagle and whatever ad agency they're working with to come up with this. And that definitely didn't happen. I mean, if it did, I'd love to see evidence of that. But so there's the conflation of that. And if you notice throughout this video, she had little clips from headlines of different news articles, and everything was referring to the Trump administration. So this is a company, sells jeans, wanted an attractive person to represent their genes, someone who's relevant in the current culture. And like, this is the response. And there's a conflation between a company running a marketing ad and what's happening in politics. But the thing that really caught my attention with this is the juxtaposition of eugenics and beauty standards. And the reason why I want to call this out is because 2 months ago, I was called a eugenicist. I love posting. I used to love posting on LinkedIn, sharing, people within my network sharing what I was writing. And I would always just, drop links and stuff. Never got any engagement on LinkedIn. If you've ever used LinkedIn, you probably know, like, there's just terrible engagement. But I just one day I published this piece and then I posted today's Substack post is highly thought-provoking but borderline offensive. Reader discretion is advised. Like, I, at this point in publishing on LinkedIn, I just got so frustrated. Like, I just wanted to share stuff and give it to people to read. But I used to write like posts and stuff, and it just didn't go anywhere. So it was a waste of my time. So this was the first thing that came to my mind. So this is what I posted. And the article, I have a separate commentary. I'll link in the description as well as the article. This article is basically about the costs of obesity. It's a chronic healthcare epidemic that has actual costs. Like, a good example is if you are morbidly obese, if you've ever watched like My 600-Pound Life or whatever the show is on TLC, you have these morbidly obese people that you can't physically move them. So if they have an emergency, like, we don't have a hospital system with ambulances that can move these people. I think I saw a headline when I was researching this that there was a guy in Kansas City who they had to bring like a flatbed that you would put like a car on if you're getting car towed to move a guy to the hospital because he was so large. So we have this obesity epidemic in America. The majority of Americans are either obese or they're overweight on the way to becoming obese, and there's a cost to the healthcare system. So the article dives into this, and the question is, who pays for these people? I'm biased. I run marathons. I work out daily, sometimes multiple times a day. I'm a firm believer in investing in my health. I eat a very clean diet for the most part. I do have a sweet tooth, but other than that, eating a very clean diet, don't go out to eat very much. I could probably count the number of times I've had fast food on my hand, like on one hand. Like, it's just has never been a part of my life. And so there is a relevant question to ask here, especially as we move into a post-work world. This is something I really focus on and write about. As AI takes jobs and displaces people, they're going to lose healthcare. They're going to lose health insurance. And this is already progressing in this direction because healthcare costs, especially the cost burden borne by employers, has increased astronomically. So if you think your premium is expensive, look at the books of whoever is employing you. It's gotten expensive for them too. So if you're sitting in a C-suite of a big company and you're like, if I continue employing these people, I'm going to have to provide health insurance and all these benefits, or I can swap them out with AI. Which option are you going to choose, right? So all these fringe benefits are going to catalyze AI adoption because they've gotten so expensive. So this raises an obvious question. When we move into a post-work world where more people don't have jobs than have them, we're not generating enough payroll taxes, tax revenue, and you have all these big entitlement programs like Medicaid and food stamps and the like that people are increasingly dependent on because they've lost their jobs. Who pays? Like, is it my responsibility as a self-employed writer and creator to pay more in taxes for someone who's not taking care of themselves? That's a really hard sell. I'm not going to lie. And again, this is my bias and I openly admit it. It's a really hard sell for someone like me who literally puts in the miles, wakes up early when I have to, like, does what I need to do to get my workouts in. It's a really hard sell to ask me to pay more for someone who sits on the couch all day, watching Netflix and just feeding feeding on garbage. And so I think this is a part of our social contract in the United States. It's been a big tension point for a really long time. Healthcare has gotten so incredibly expensive. And just a lot of the costs and inefficiencies have to do with chronic diseases that we're not addressing. So the whole body positivity movement and like the celebration of obesity is just quite repulsive, to be totally frank. And there's an economic problem underpinning it that is further alienating people. People like me are going to, I think, opt out as the more and more new options come online. We're already seeing this with health data trackers. I wear a Garmin and track a lot of things on that. People with the glucose monitors. You can subscribe to a service like Levels, for example, and it'll tell you what's going on within your body. As more of this comes online and as more people start using AI tools and stuff, people are going to opt out. They're going to opt into acute care. So if you are in a car accident or you break a bone, okay, you're going to have something in place for that. But other than that, people are going to start opting out of healthcare. And so it's a house of cards that I think is going to collapse. And one of the things I do with writing on Substack is I ask questions like this because I think it's important and we need to have real, frank conversations about it. So anyways, I posted this on LinkedIn just to share, and it got a ton of responses, and I was not expecting that at all. It just, 9,000 impressions is I think the highest I've ever gotten on anything, and it was literally just a screenshot of the article in 2 sentences. So I was shocked. It clearly hit a nerve. But one of the things that was really interesting to me was there was an individual who said it's not borderline offensive, it's offensive. And I will caveat this too by saying what I do on Substack, if you're interested in subscribing, you can subscribe. But I usually do free previews and then paywall all of my posts. So I know kind of more or less who is subscribed to me from LinkedIn. I have that data. And it's interesting that people were responding to a post I made about an article I wrote, and they hadn't actually read the article. And I know they hadn't read the article because I paywalled it. So anyways, it got to the point where someone called me eugenicist, and unfortunately I can't share their original comment because they, after this, blocked me and like unconnected with me. But I responded by asking, how is asking a question about a public health crisis eugenicist? Eugenics is about selective breeding. Nothing in the essay that I wrote discusses selective breeding. And so that was an immediate red flag for me because eugenics is a very niche thing. I would ask you this, if I was making this video this time last year and talking about eugenics, would it be on your radar? Is it something you could easily define? Is it something you were even thinking about? My assumption is that for the vast majority of people, no. Like, no one talks about eugenics. It's something that happened in history that emanated out of 19th century philosophy and just things that were happening in Europe at that time, and then obviously played out during World War II and the 1920s up until World War II. But it's not something that is openly really discussed or talked about. But what eugenics at its core is a scientific belief, or pseudoscience. But at the time, it was believed to be legitimate. It was a belief that you could selectively breed a population and eliminate undesirable traits from society. So to kind of give you an example, here in the United States, we practice eugenics. Like, this isn't just a Nazi thing. The Nazis are obviously most well known for this. But this was a pretty common thing, and we actually practiced eugenics here. And as I'll show you in a couple moments, we're still practicing it. So this is a map. This is a PBS article, and this is a map from 1935. But eugenics was a commonly accepted means of protecting society from offspring, and therefore equally suspect of those individuals deemed inferior or dangerous: the poor, the disabled, the mentally ill, criminals, and people of color. So at the time, we had insane asylums, and obviously there was different sterilization campaigns that were carried out by against different groups, so Native Americans, African Americans, that kind of thing, poor people. And so this is a map of different procedures that were done, quantifying procedures that were done. So all of these states, except for the ones in white, had some sort of eugenic sterilization program. And so in California here, they had almost, I think, 1,000, looks like 10,000, sorry. 9,997 procedures were done to sterilize people. So that's what like eugenics looked like in practice. And what's wild to me is it's obvious that this woman has drunk the Kool-Aid. She's all in on the left. You can see that she herself is putting out the leftist propaganda she believes in. But I'm gonna go out on a limb here and assume she's probably pro Planned Parenthood, pro women's reproductive health, pro abortion, pro birth control, all those things. So what a lot of people don't know, that Planned Parenthood was founded as a eugenics program. So this is Planned Parenthood's website. Like, I'm not making this up. This is on their website. I will link it. You can go look at it. But Margaret Sanger was the founder of Planned Parenthood, and she believed in eugenics. So it talks about here, she believed in eugenics, an inherently racist and ableist ideology that labeled certain people unfit to have children. So this was a theory that society could be improved through planned breeding for desirable traits like intelligence and industriousness. So note here, this isn't about beauty standards, and it's not even about being blonde haired or blue eyed. For folks, that was just like a means to an end. The real objective was intelligence, being smart, industrious, entrepreneurial, hardworking. So at the time, there was kind of a hierarchy of different races of people, to be totally frank, and some were seen as more or better at certain things than others. So beauty was never part of the eugenics conversation. Beauty has absolutely nothing to do with it. Like, Hitler wasn't like, okay, the Aryan race is superior because blonde hair and blue eyes are superior. Like, he believed the Aryan race was superior because of what it represented in terms of intelligence and athleticism and industriousness and entrepreneurial spirit and that kind of thing. It had nothing. I mean, there was an aesthetic component to it, sure, but it wasn't just like the vanity of the aesthetic. Like, it represented something else. And so in the early 20th century, eugenics ideas were popular among highly educated, privileged, and mostly white Americans. So the same people, the same group of smart people that this woman would probably identify with were the ones promoting eugenics policies. It was coming from the elites of society, or the intelligentsia and the cultural elites. It wasn't coming from the poor working people. It was coming from, those with college degrees. Wrong one. Okay. So Margaret Sanger pronounced her belief in alignment with eugenics movement many times in her writings, especially in the scientific journal Birth Control Review. So her and I think her sister were like pushing birth control. And so she was writing about this, but she was writing about it from a eugenics perspective. At times, Sanger tried to argue for eugenics that was not applied based on race or religion, but in a society built on the belief of white supremacy, physical and mental fitness are always judged based on race. Again, beauty is not part of the conversation here. Physical and mental fitness. Eugenics, therefore, is inherently racist. She held beliefs that, from the very beginning, undermined her movement for reproductive freedom and caused harm to countless people. Sanger was so intent on her mission to advocate for birth control that she chose to align herself with ideas and organizations that were ableist and white supremacist. So it talks about how she spoke at a KKK rally. And so the acceptance of, so Sanger endorsed this decision in which the U.S. Supreme Court ruled states could forcibly sterilize people deemed unfit without their consent and sometimes without their knowledge. The acceptance of this decision by Sanger and other thought leaders laid the foundation for tens of thousands of people to be sterilized, often against their will. So we did this. This is the United States. This is Planned Parenthood. This is what Planned Parenthood was founded upon. And it wasn't until, the 60s and 70s with the sexual revolution that birth control was remarketed as something new. It was designed. It was designed as this. And if you've read Thomas Malthus, he was a 18th, 19th century philosopher. But he talked about how his whole thing is the population was growing too quickly in England, and there wasn't enough food to feed the population. So at some point, the humans would outstrip the planet of its resources. And so one of the policies, or one of the theories that was promoted by Thomas Malthus, was different versions of not just sterilization, but, population control. So in one of his writings, he talked about how, maybe unleashing some sort of bacteria or virus or something within like tenement housing where workers were packed together and there wasn't a lot of good hygiene and cleanliness, and then they would naturally kind of die off on their own because people would get sick and disease would spread and that kind of thing. So people have been talking about this stuff for a while, especially in the intelligent elitist circles. So this isn't new. This isn't like a Trumpian thing. This has been, eugenics and this idea of controlling the population and controlling birth in order to get different outcomes has been around for a while. But what's new is the injection of eugenics in culture and the assumption that it's inextricably related to beauty. And she, this chick talked about it in this video, and then that was kind of the implicit response with the post I made is, who should pay for fat people? Trying to come up with an interesting headline, but the idea is questioning obesity, but obviously calling into question the fat acceptance movement. So mine is totally about aesthetics, right? But from a health perspective, not a beauty perspective. And that's where the responses came from, is, asking a public question about public health is eugenicist in some way. And I wanted to raise this because we're seeing a ramp up in rhetoric from the left that is getting increasingly violent. For months now since Trump was reelected, things like fascism and Nazism and now, white supremacy, we've been hearing these terms over and over again. But the invocation of the term eugenics and calling people eugenicists signals something's happening. So these people like this who are responding to the ad campaign, it's clear they're not thinking, they're not analyzing what they're being told, because as I've just laid out, like, eugenics has absolutely nothing to do with beauty standards. It's about physical and mental fitness. It's about intelligence and entrepreneurialism, industriousness. It's about kind of building a quote unquote better society in whatever image you're looking to build it in. And yeah, there is racist undertones to it, but it has nothing to do with beauty standards. Absolutely nothing. But in the cases I've been observing this, it's been applied as eugenics, and calling people eugenicists has been applied with regard to beauty, and especially with regard to critiques of the fat acceptance movement. So continuing to use this type of rhetoric it is problematic, in my opinion, because she's also here invoking what happened in history and what happened in the past. So, anyone, if you call someone a Nazi, for example, you're casting them as a group of people who are evil, a group of people who did harm, a group of people who, if they returned, should be thwarted at all costs. And so anyone who disagrees with leftist ideology and clearly understands what this ad is getting at, they're all being lumped together as fascist, Nazi, white supremacist eugenicists. And the eugenics piece is important because if you disregard the beauty piece of it that they're trying to call attention to, and you look at it as, population control and forced sterilization, well, then it becomes an existential threat. And so if you're someone on the left who, as we've been seeing, and maybe I've been watching the wrong news, I don't know, you tell me, but it seems like people on the left have been more willing to engage in acts of violence. We've seen shootings. We've seen people throwing Molotov cocktails at private property and accosting people. We've seen criminal activities in major cities, all sorts of stuff, right? And so we're seeing an uptick in violence, and we're seeing a movement towards rhetoric that justifies the use of violence against a perceived enemy. And so I think that's important. I think a lot of us are like, okay, fascist, okay, Nazi, like kind of rolling our eyes. But this one I think is worth paying attention to because it's clear it's a misapplication of a term that has nothing to do with beauty standards. And it's clear this terminology didn't just come out of nowhere. I think most people are familiar with, they've at least heard the term fascist, heard the term Nazi. A lot of people haven't heard the term eugenics. So the fact that this is now being parroted on social media tells me this is coming from somewhere. And obviously it's not coming from the White House, because the White House isn't engaged in a eugenics program. So where is this coming from? Obviously the media, mainstream media, but why? Why is this term now being circulated? I think that's a really important thing to think about. And, I don't watch too much mainstream media. I, prefer to look for independent media sources. But, if you watch mainstream media and you've heard, folks on MSNBC, for example, using the term eugenicist or eugenics, I would be curious to know about that, because I suspect that might be where it's coming from, or New York Times or something like that. But it's clear this terminology, this rhetoric is coming from somewhere. It's not organic to these people commenting about it on social media. So I would be curious to know where they're getting it from, because I think the source of that, the objective is to rile up this group of people to potentially engage in acts of violence against political opponents. And so I think this is words matter. Words are very important. This is why I was completely opposed to the use of pronouns when that was a whole thing. I think words matter. You can't just change words. You can't change definitions of things to suit your ideology. We need to really be vigilant about this. But I want to close by saying eugenics is happening. So eugenics is selectively breeding. It's controlling for certain desirable traits. And oftentimes those traits are based on ideas about a race, and those ideas, all sorts of things. You might want a certain race for aesthetic reasons, as the Nazis put out, industriousness and intelligence and that kind of thing. So there's different reasons why you might control for certain traits. But I don't think people like this woman realize we're already engaging in eugenics. So I just Googled a couple things. So this is a fertility clinic where you can go get a bunch of services. Their services include eye color and sex selection. So you can choose the gender of your child. You can go in, and if you do not want a boy, you can go and choose. You can have, IVF done, and you can go choose the gender of your child. And of course, a lot of this too, I'll say, is cast as screening. There's screening for hereditary diseases, but in the process of screening, you can now inject certain traits or select certain aspects of your offspring to become a certain, to come out a certain way. So we don't even have to sterilize people anymore. Like, you can design babies, and with CRISPR and other gene editing technologies, like, we have the ability to do this. And I think this is gonna play out and become more important in the coming years as more and more advances are made in the life sciences. People don't really talk about this. Everyone's so focused on AI, but there's a major revolution happening in the life sciences, and we're on the precipice of being able to augment our biology in ways that hadn't really been possible before. And I do believe this is possible and probably likely to happen, is that we're going to have groups of people, the haves and the have-nots. The haves who have the resources and the access to certain procedures are going to be able to augment their biology for specific traits. So things like intelligence, things like beauty, things like, I wrote a piece about this, but it was covered in Black Mirror, but with a neural implant chip, the ability to control your emotions. So being able to stay cool and calm under pressure. Emotional intelligence is about to become a big deal once AI comes fully online. So I think we're moving into a state where we're going to be able to create superhumans, and that new breed of human is going to replace Homo sapiens. Like, I really do believe we're on that path. And so this is a milestone, right? You got to one thing at a time, right? And so you yesterday we were screening for hereditary traits that were going to be problematic. Today we're doing, selection of what gender you want. And tomorrow, you can have a high IQ child and only have really smart people. But aside from IVF, like, people have been doing this for a while with sperm donors, right? Like, all sorts of times, like, I want a musician. I only want sperm from a musician. So if you're doing IVF, or you're, a single mom who wants to have a child, you can go to a sperm bank and select your sperm. So this is eugenics in action. So you can do a donor search. Like, this is, again, I just Googled this, Fairfax Cryobank. You can do a donor search. You can scan for height, for ancestry, for hair color, for eye color. So if that's not racist, I don't know what is. Education. You can scan for ethnic background, skin tone, hair type. What else? Lifestyle. You can scan for astrological signs, their favorite subject, religion. You can select out Jewish ancestry. So if this woman thinks that I shared in that expose, if she thinks that an American Eagle ad campaign is promoting Nazi propaganda, this is literally right here. Like, I don't know how much more explicit you can get. Personal goals, talents, hobbies, like, this is available now. This is available. Anyone can go do this. So this is eugenics in action. This isn't a Trump policy. This isn't a government policy. Anyone who has the desire and the money to do this can go and select and have a quote unquote superior child based on, however they define what superior looks like. So we're already doing this, and America has been complicit in eugenics for a very long time. And I think because we're conflating the two, on the one hand, I think it could lead to increased calls for violence, as folks on the left see people who disagree with them as an existential threat. So I think there's that aspect to it. But then I also see the conflation of eugenics and beauty standards as kind of muddying the waters. So when things like transhumanism really take off and people have the ability to do different things that segregate themselves from the rest of society, we're not going to know how to respond, because our words have been so misconstrued that we won't understand what's going on. We've obviously clearly lost the ability to critically think for ourselves. So this is important, right? It's not just what's happening today. It's what's going to happen in 10, 20, 30 years from now. And we're getting to a point where you can edit and select and create whatever you want. And so if you have a perception of what superior is, and your perception of superior is aligned with the majority of the population, we're going to start having children that reflect that. And as new technologies come online to enhance your physical performance or your cognitive capabilities, we're going to see a stratification between Homo sapiens as we are today and whatever new advanced, augmented, potentially inorganic species emerges tomorrow. And there won't be an opportunity to compete. You're not going to have a shot in the dark. A really good film to watch is Elysium with Matt Damon. This kind of talks about the segregation of healthcare. It's not quite like a eugenics film. It's more about like access to health services and how the wealthy elites have left the poor peasants on earth to die in squalor. But I think it's a good illustration of kind of where we're going in terms of segregation. And if you apply eugenics, actual eugenics onto it, you can see how we're going to create a stratified society that you won't be able to bridge the gap any further. It's going to be biologically stratified, not just socioeconomically. So it's important to pay attention to where this is going. I would be curious to know your thoughts on this. If you saw the ad and what you thought. I mean, it's so silly. I mean, she's reminds me of Farrah Fawcett from the 70s. I don't think there's anything wrong with this ad. I mean, again, it was a fun play on words. If you weren't taking it seriously and you understood that, totally fine. But the manufactured outrage has definitely hit the internet hard. So I would love to know your thoughts on this. If you found this thoughtful and thought-provoking, I would love it if you would subscribe and follow and share with anyone who you might also think this is interesting. And I will see you in the next video.